Yes, hello, good everyone. As Alice said, my name is Lasse Rungholm. I'm based in Denmark. I'm trained as a pilot and as a lawyer. I live and work out of Denmark, but I lived in the US, in Spain, in Norway, and in the Maldives. Torturing myself by flying seaplanes in flip-flops and shorts. Job of a lifetime. Should have stayed there maybe. So, anyway, I'm here to talk a little bit about the problem with Europe and why this is so difficult. I did not get it clear for my slides. Can I have that? Thank you. Press the green button. The EU circus. Now, since I made this speech the last time, I've added the Union Jack, which is kind of obvious why. We don't have a lot of time, so I might be rushing through this, but the basis of the EU, of course, is the 28 different member states, which probably soon will be 27. There's 24 official languages. It's not like the English language is the one that we revert to if there's a misunderstanding. There are 24 original languages, so you can see there's a lot of language problems. Besides that, of course, there's an overall bureaucracy. We've all heard of the Parliament moving once a month. And on top of all this, now we have the Brexit, as Shakespeare might have put it, to Brexit or not to Brexit. That means on 12, probably England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, Isle of Man, and Channel Islands might be leaving the EU, or they might not. There's a lot of different cultures in the EU, which makes this so difficult. Of course, we have the UK, the farce of the Brexit. We have France, which is way more serious with the Yellow Vest movement right now. And of course, there's always Greece, which even have their own alphabet. It makes it really, really difficult to make anything happen. The EU circus consists of a lot of institutions and bodies, the most important ones being the European Parliament, the European Commission, and the Court of Justice of the European Union. Those are most relevant when we're talking about the importation of aircraft. In relation to lawmaking, we have three major institutions, as mentioned, the European Parliament. We also have the Council of the EU, and of course the Commission, as mentioned. When we're talking about the rule of law and judging it, the Court of Justice, of course, is the one that upholds the rule of the European law, and what they say is basically final. And then, of course, there's the Court of Auditors. So, why are the same rules interpreted differently from member state to member state? Well, one thing is the language barriers, as we talked about. Many will remember the Finnish case, which was all about language. Why is the story never the same? You hear from different service providers, this can be done, this can be done, this may be legal in Malta or in Cyprus or whatever. And if you look at it that way without knowing much about it, it must seem like a big circus. Let me give you two examples. One, you have an aircraft that's fully imported, you have reclaimed the VAT, maybe, through a provider, and you want to use this for private use. This is not possible by the rule of law. You can see the example says aircraft predominantly used for business. If you have a deliberate wrong use of the rules, you are getting into a minefield. The EU VAT is governed by a VAT directive. That means it's a framework for the national member state to invoke their own national law. It's the same framework everywhere. Now, VAT rules stem back from the 60s, so of course there's a hell of a lot of difference between the different countries' rules. Some have exemptions for milk, some has for diapers, some has for horse food. In the UK, there used to be an exemption for aircraft. We had the same thing in Denmark. It's very, very different from EU state to EU state. But one thing is certain, the framework you must adhere to. And the framework says there's no way that you can reclaim VAT for an aircraft if you intend and have advised the authorities that you want to use this privately. That's not allowed. Many will remember the Lewis Hamilton case. this way of doing business may not, be detected. You may not be caught, but if you do, then the shit hits the fan, like the Paradise Papers. Remember Lewis Hamilton standing in front of his red jet? They have actually told the authorities that they wanted to use this 15% for private use, and that was, in accordance with the Isle of Man rule, but it's definitely not okay when it comes to the EU framework. Some member states allows this anyway. If you get caught by the EU system, in the end, it will be the EU Court of Justice that decides whether this was correct or wrong, and that might be very, very costly. Example 2, a member state who is delaying implementation of rules. We've seen this. As a lessee, you cannot import and reclaim VAT for articles that you lease. Another example is an AOC holder, how you can be VAT exempt if you're running an airline. What is an airline? That can be discussed. There are many variations seen all over different jurisdictions. The member states have various ways of implementing these rules, but in the end, again, as it's up to the European Court of Justice to decide what's good and what's not good, what's wrong and what's not wrong, and then you make a big, serious problem. It's kind of a circus, hence the examples. Second subject is Brexit, short update, and it has to be short because nobody really knows what's going on. One thing's for certain, it takes two to get a divorce. And when I look at it from that perspective, it seems like the UK decided to leave, but they want to have their cake and eat it, I believe the phrase is, somewhat at least. The facts right now is that they will leave April 12th unless something else has or will be agreed on. If they agree, they have until the 22nd of May if they decide on a deal. That's how I understand it. In that case, there will be a transition period until the end of 2020, so they can do a final deal. But as it is right now, no deal seems close right now. There's a lot of voting going on in the UK Parliament today, I understand. Some of the important points is the custom union and the single market, and of course the backstop with Northern Ireland. Nobody can really make a conclusion. Things may change, as it's said. So what can happen? Well, Brexit can be cancelled, and it'll be business as usual. It's very unlikely, but right now it seems like there's a majority for it if you look at the polls. And that is kind of a cause for debate, because some people say, no, you can't have another vote. But what people seem to forget is this was actually the second vote now, because back in 1975, 4 years after the Brits entered the UK, they actually had a vote about to stay or not to stay, and 67% at that time voted to stay. So then they had the second vote 3 years ago, and some say, why don't have a third vote now? People call it the second vote because they kind of forget what happened 45 years ago. Anyway, if it's cancelled, then they'll stay. If it's a soft Brexit, then there'll be one variation, a hard Brexit, another, but the no deal, which seems likely in 10 days from now, it's like a no deal, then they're out. It might as well be Nigeria or another third world country, or a third country, sorry. One thing is for certain, if they leave, there will be uncertainty for many months, many years maybe. Most aviation-related and other treaties will have to be negotiated. I think there's more than 200 treaties signed by the EU that the UK will have to sign themselves. I think there has been, the number we heard in the London conference was 30,000 British pilots have asked for an Irish license. So you can imagine that's not going to happen overnight. Basically, after April 12th, these pilots will not be allowed to fly unless they get a validation. So it's kind of chaos. I think they're preparing for it, but it might be a problem. In relation to aircraft importation, I know these slides are available on the CJI website afterwards. You can download that, so I'm not going to go into detail with this. It just, it is said here how an export of an aircraft, or the mere fact that it's not in the EU anymore, after the Brexit, if that happens, then this aircraft will be treated as if it was in a third country, which means that in over a period of 3 years, it can be re-imported. But you can read more about this following these links. There's not really an agreement between the experts of what the status will be of an aircraft when this happens. Is it important where it was imported, like in the Isle of Man or in the UK, or doesn't that matter? My own opinion is it shouldn't really matter. It's imported into the EU, so where that happened is not important. It's still imported after Brexit. Some say the different. An expert of aviation law in the UK, you might know her name, Aoife O'Sullivan. She says the opposite. So time will tell. Anyway, moving on to the last subject. That's the pros and cons for private operators when operating in the EU. This is probably the most simple presentation of that ever. One thing is certain, you always need some kind of procedure if you're flying into the EU with a non-EU registered aircraft. There are only two options. You can fully import or you can temporarily admit your airplane. Those are the two. If you do nothing, then you will actually be using the rules of the temporary admission regime. Those are the only two. Every airline flying into Europe today, like Emirates out of here into London, and going back, they're temporarily admitting their airplane. That's important to know. The EU importation and VAT is often presented based on articles and paragraphs and laws instead. I want to do this very quickly based on frequently asked questions that we have received from operators. Listing the pros and cons for each option. The pros on the following slides will be green, the cons will be yellow. So, pros and cons related to VAT handling. Full importation, there are really no pros compared to the temporary admission. With the temporary admission, the pro is that you have no VAT liability and the VAT is suspended. With the full importation, the cons are that you cannot import as a lessee, at least legally, according to the EU Court of Justice and the EU framework. You must use the airplane for the correct economic activity for a minimum of 5 years. It's really complicated. You have huge potential VAT risk if something goes wrong. And you risk of ending up in a situation where this will be looked at differently from country to country. If you decide to do a full import, the advice is to get a binding assessment notice from your authority in the country where you decide to import. That's available in all EU member states. The cons with the temporary admission is you cannot issue a ticket. Who does that anyway? And you're not allowed to have commercial freight on board your airplane. The figure 2, the CEO is using the aircraft for entertainment use, hobby use, commuting, or personal recreational travel. There's really no pros compared to the temporary admission by doing a full import. If you do a temporary admission, you'll have unlimited non-business use. Aircraft can be used for any purpose. The cons, on the other hand, for a full import, if you're using it privately, you must handle this correctly worldwide. You cannot fly privately, even between two US cities, if your aircraft is imported in the EU and you have fully reclaimed the VAT. That's a really important thing to know. You must pay proper compensation directly to the importer if you're using it privately. Imputed income will not work as compensation, and the civil values are very often too low. That's a US term primarily. Again, with temporary admission, the cons are no ticket or direct payment is allowed and no commercial freight is allowed. Figure 3, pros and cons of flying internally in the EU. Can we fly from Paris to Hamburg? Yes, you can do that. Full importation, unlimited travel, no cons. Temporary admission, you can fly limited for up to 6 months at a time, and no cons. Figure 4, pros and cons, fixed base, the long-term parking in the EU. Can we rent a hangar? Full importation, yes, no cons. Temporary admission, you cannot rent a hangar permanently, because that would mean you are establishing a base inside the EU, which is not allowed. As it says in the cons, fixed base is not allowed, long-term parking is not a good idea. The aircraft must have a behavior like a local, then temporary admission doesn't work. Figure 5, pros and cons. EU passengers on internal legs. Full importation, yes, no cons. Temporary admission, yes, no cons. You can do that. Figure 6, pilots on EU pilots on internal legs. Can we hire EU resident pilots? Yes, you can with full invitation. Yes, you can with temporary admission. It is, though, a condition that the EU resident pilots are directly employed by the customs declarant. So, in conclusion, full importation, the pros, full importation will give you all the necessary flight privileges for the typical private operator. The cons, full importation can have a huge economic effect and potential liability for the typical private operator. Temporary admission, pros, temporary admission will give you all the necessary flight privileges for the typical private non-EU based operator, and there are really no cons. If you want to seek more information on this, you can check the details yourself. We have a lot of publications and information available on our website, and you're free to have a look at that. It's also a little folder on the table, and we're here for the rest of the day. Any questions? 24 seconds to go.
Any questions? 1 minute and 24. Okay, there's one question. Tongue-in-cheek one. If we switch to Slido, someone's come up with a brilliant comment. If we can show Slido. Sorry. I think this one deserves real credit. And here's another one, which is from one of your... What's you now advising your clients that were fully imported via Denmark? If you've already imported your aircraft into the EU,
Yep.
what do you do? Just stay fully imported?
Yeah, you don't have to do anything.
Okay, any other questions or comments? If not, then thank you very much.
You're welcome.